Today, I'm going to be covering a topic that's been getting some pretty crazy results with my clients, and it's something so simple that we as humans do every day, but we just neglect to apply it to this area of leadership, essentially. And that tool, that hack, is nothing revolutionary. It's been used for decades, even centuries, and that is storytelling. Now, I'm from Africa. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I know in Africa, when we tell stories, stories are used to pass down family history, general history about the country, but also context, because as you can imagine, back then we didn't have cell phones like what we do now to be able to capture these moments. No, we actually relied on stories. So today I'm going to be touching on how we can actually utilize stories as leaders to be able to get the point across, because I know that I've been a part of organizations or in environments where the person is speaking and they're spitting out a whole bunch of facts, figures, graphs, and numbers. And till this day, I can't even remember what it is that they talked about. But the people that communicated their facts, their numbers, whatever it is that they're trying to get across, their standards, their values, when they communicated those using stories, that's when they're able to get things to stick. And those are the things that have stuck with me, because the stories that they told made me feel something. They gave me something to connect, and it was relevant to me in some way, shape, or form. So I remember I was talking to a friend recently, and they'd been to a conference, an industry conference, and they heard that they'd gotten this guest speaker, the organizers, that paid a few $1,000s, and it was supposed to be a big deal. They'd hired out an auditorium, and they were pretty excited about it. So they get into this place, and they see other industry professionals that they know. Everyone takes a seat, the event starts, and then this guest speaker that everyone had been waiting to hear from comes out. They start their spiel, and not even 5 minutes in, my friend started looking around, and he noticed, it wasn't a mass exodus, but it was, maybe one or two people, groups that had come together, slowly getting up and leaving, up until the point where it was about 5-10 minutes into it, and about half the auditorium was left. Now, let's just pause there. The organizers had paid thousands of dollars to get this person in, because obviously they had value. You wouldn't pay thousands of dollars for just anyone off the street to come and give a spiel, right? So one, we knew that whatever this person had to say carried weight, it had value. But how they delivered it, was it memorable? People couldn't connect with it, and quite honestly, they didn't see it as relevant. So I remember I was chatting to this friend, and it got me thinking. I started talking to my clients and seeing that they were having similar problems. The team, wasn't listening. They told them multiple times the same thing, but a day or two later, or even a week later, standards would slip and they'll be back to square one where they were before. I started talking to them, and I came up with this framework right here to help them implement and really cement the values or the standards that they want. The first one is making the mistake of just recounting an event and not actually telling a story. Now, I think about this when I get home from work and my wife asks me, Oz, how was your day? And instantly I go into my male logical mind, right? I start recounting the day logically, in chronological order of how things happened. I got up this morning and it was pretty good, and then I ended up hitting the gym. I was there with a friend. I ended up bumping into someone, and we ended up having a bit of a chat. But once I was finished there, hit the showers, and I got into a bit of work. And as I start to go on, I can see my wife's eyes start to glaze over, and I've already started losing her. But how guilty are we of this on a day-to-day basis? Now, it may not be all of you, but I can guess it's going to be a majority of you that when it comes to telling a story, you start to recount the events in chronological order, and there's no reason for people to connect with it. So that's mistake number one, recounting events and not actually telling the story. Now, the next one here applies to most leaders, and we can fall into this trap of talking at people instead of actually engaging in a dialogue. Kind of like what I'm doing right now. I'm talking to a camera, but really what I'm envisioning is, as I'm looking at the lens, I'm envisioning that I'm talking to an individual, just one person, not a camera, not a room full of people, just one person. That's my goal, to connect with you. When it comes to communication around stories as leaders, you don't want to talk at people like you're talking to a brick wall. No, invite them. Telling stories is a dialogue. Start to look at the reactions that they're getting. If they're starting to glaze over, then you know as a leader that you need to change up your maybe cadence. maybe chuck in one of these elements that I'm about to go over to be able to re-engage people so that you can take them from where they are to where they need to go and you can get your point across. So, with that being said, I'm going to get into the 4 elements of how to tell a good story that you can start using as soon as this video is finished in everyday life. Element number 1 is stakes. To tell a good story, there needs to be something at stake. Now, I know that when you go to the movies, there's always a common theme that the movie follows. You get introduced to the characters, there's a problem, and then there are stakes within that problem, something that they could lose if this problem isn't solved. And I know when that happens, naturally what happens is you start to lean in, you engage with the story. And that's essentially what we want to do when we're telling stories to our team members. We want them to be able to engage with it. There's something at stake. And this applies when you're having sales conversations, especially with clients or customers. How do you get people to engage? And how you do that is through stakes. There has to be something at stake. So that's number 1. Number 2 is a surprise. Now, comedians do this quite well, and you can probably go and watch, your favorite comedians out there. One of my favorite is Kevin Hart. And for him, whenever he speaks, and I feel like comedians do this very well, there's always some sort of surprise or a sharp turn that people weren't really expecting. It gets them to engage and really lock in and pay attention. So that's step number 2. You want to be able to have a surprise. That's element number 2. Number 3 is one that most people normally shrug their shoulders at and say that's not really them, and that's humor. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean you have to be a comedian like Kevin Hart, like I just mentioned before. No, this is really when you just lean into your personality, who you are, because not everyone can be Kevin Hart, but you can be you. I can be Ozzy, and I can be funny in my own right. And to be honest, your team probably finds you funny in some way, shape, or form. A good way to find out your style of humor that you can start to utilize in stories is ask the people around you. They know you best. So ask them, in what way do you think I'm funny? When I speak or when I tell stories, when I'm yarning to you, how do you find me funny? Take those notes and start to implement them in what it is that you do. Now, element number 4. I've left this till the end because it's fitting, and that is suspense. What you want to do when you're telling stories is you want to have an element of suspense. What is the impact going to be? You want people on the edge of their seats. And the longer you can draw this out, the closer you can get people to engage in this. Now, I understand you can just tell a story and you can have all these elements, but you're probably wondering, okay, Ozzy, I get now how to tell a good story. I need to have one of these 4 elements, surprise, humor, something at stake, or suspense. But how do I actually start implementing this in my business? What does that look like? Glad you asked. I remember I was talking to my team about this, and more specifically, I was trying to call them out and raise the standard around the lateness, because there'd been a period where that standard had slipped. People were showing up 5-10 minutes late, and that become the norm. And I wanted to nip that in the bud. But I know that I didn't want to just come down hard, because I know this exact same thing. I'd told them multiple times and nothing had changed. So for me, I knew that I had to do something different. And this is really where it started and why this is getting the results that it is with my clients. I decided to illustrate this through a story. Now, I have a friend of mine who runs a podcast, and I sometimes help him out with them. But one of the things that he mentioned at the very start was, man, it's really frustrating that it takes about 15, 20 minutes into the conversation in this podcast with my guest that we really get the juices flowing, and now we can get some gold in this conversation. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. It's essentially a warm-up. And for us, in terms of what I did with my team, is we'd normally have discussions to start the day. And those discussions, whether there were whatever topic it is that we're talking about, what would actually impact them greatly was whether or not people started late. By the time we got to the end, it's almost like we were starting to get into our groove. But by then, it was already time to finish, and we were missing out on the gold. So I knew that I had to crack down on this lateness, because this is the impact that it was having. I had a bright idea. Why not use a story to illustrate this point? So I remember at the end of a session, I remember talking to my team, and I remember pointing out to them, hey, look, guys, I remember I was talking to my friend, and he runs a podcast, and one of the things that he said to me that stuck out to me was, whenever I'm in a podcast, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes before we get into the conversation flow and some gold really starts to, some gems really start to be dropped. And to be honest, I think it's quite the same when we have our discussion topics right here, that it's affected when people start to arrive late. Just at that time where we're starting to get into the groove of it, everyone's engaged and the gold is really starting to flow. We have to cut it, and it's almost like when you're driving a car and you pull the handbrake. It's such a sudden stop, it's jarring. And I feel like it's the same thing when it comes to the lateness and how that's impacting our discussion topics. So with that, I really love us to hone in and really focus again on our promptness. We want to be able to arrive on time because we know that this is the impact that it's having. And to be quite honest, it actually affects what you guys are able to pull out from this conversation for yourselves as well. So from today, I'd really love us to, get that standard back up again so that we can arrive on time and actually enjoy and get the most out of these conversations that we have together. What actually happened after that was something that I wasn't expecting. Normally when you have these conversations, it can feel like you're calling people out, It makes sense. You're essentially telling them off. What one of my team members said was that by far was one of the best telling offs I've ever had. And I think that's the goal when it comes to leadership, where you're not really calling people out. Granted, there are times where you need to do that with what I call C players, and we'll address that in another video. But there are also times when people need to be called up to a higher standard, not called out. Because what happens when you call people up to a higher standard is next time when it comes to a conversation, they know that you're coming into it with the right mindset and with the right heart behind what it is that you're saying. That what you're saying is for their growth and it's for their benefit. And once they know that you care, it makes the conversations, tough conversations, a lot easier to have from that point onwards. So just to recap what we touched on today, in order to make what you have to say memorable, one, you want to start incorporating stories into what it is that you're saying. And those stories can be either personal or professional, but I'll leave that to you to decide because sometimes I understand you don't want to share too much, but really I encourage you and I challenge you to start utilizing stories to be able to get your point across because numbers and facts and figures, that stuff only lasts for a short period of time. But what sticks in hearts and what makes it memorable is those stories. And you have a lot of them. So this has been Aussie. Make sure you apply those 4 elements. Stakes, you want to have something at stake. You want to have something worth a surprise, a knee-jerker, something that people don't really expect. Insert a bit of humor if you want. Play around with it. And lastly, you want to have a bit of suspense. Draw it out if you need to be and get people to the edge of their seats. So this has been Aussie from The Leadership Gap, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.